How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, coming to you live today here on April 18th, officially 1 week away from the NFL Draft, from the first round of the NFL Draft. More content to come around that in the coming week. But today, I have a lot more stories to talk to you guys about, to discuss on today's episode, starting with Patrick Mahomes. Recently this week, he was named to Time Magazine's Top 100 Most Influential People's list. This week, he talked about it. They asked him a few questions about GOAT status, his team going forward. We're going to get into all of that on everything he said. Then later in the show, we're going to go over all the news, the details, more coming out on this Bill Belichick situation, on him getting hired, what are the reasons of him not getting hired, some underlying things that could be true. A lot could be confusing because there's a lot of stuff out there. I'm going to try and clear it all up for you guys here on today's episode, as well as talking about another quarterback, Brock Purdy. The spring training practices are going on now. I'm going to talk about what he said on the whole beginning of this whole new year, his contract situation, Brandon Ayuk, all that and more coming on today's episode. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And like I mentioned before I jump into the first segment, I'd like to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments during today's live show, to use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, that you see there on your screen. Using this link makes me able to see your question pop up right away in my chat box. I can read your question out on air, and we can carry the conversation that way, be more engaging, a lot more conversational. It's a bit more entertaining, I think, in this way. I love engaging with you guys, so if you would please use the tip and donations link again, gsmcpodcast.net, with any of your questions or comments. It would be greatly appreciated from not only myself and this show, but all the shows across the network. And in saying that, we could start off with the first segment. Like I mentioned, Patrick Mahomes being named on the top 100 most influential people in the world, basically. This is what Time Magazine does with their special, if you would call it that. One of the most influential people in the world over the past year, winning his third Super Bowl in that run, his second consecutive Super Bowl. You can't say he hasn't earned it. He definitely has earned it, and not a lot of athletes, I feel, get recognized on here, I think. And Patrick Mahomes has just really, outside of LeBron and probably Steph Curry, are probably the biggest American sports athletes that we have, that the USA has right now at this moment. And this is a very deserving honor, recognition for Patrick Mahomes. The stats, the accolades all speak for themselves. Even if you don't know any of them, just watching him, turn on the TV during the regular season, watch him for a game or two. It all speaks for itself. You could see right away why so many people are attracted to watching him play, how successful he is, and how much he helps his team, and how much of a component he is to his team winning and having all the success that they've had. So much so that some consider him very highly. He's already being catapulted into the GOAT conversation for the last few years now, actually. He's been up there. People have been comparing him over and over to Tom Brady, all the other quarterbacks as well, Patrick Mahomes, all the greats up there, but really just Tom and Patrick, because Tom obviously has the most Super Bowls. So naturally, people start looking ahead, start looking at what this could become, start predicting. And he has been in the GOAT conversation a lot over the last few years. But they asked him about it. Time Magazine asked him about the GOAT conversation right now and what he views at it right now. What are his views on it? And he basically said, you have to build a consistency of a career. You see that in any sport. I've had a great run. I think I've done a great job so far. But it's hard to take away from what Tom did for so long, what Peyton Manning did, or Aaron Rodgers. There are so many guys, they were at such a high level for such a long time. In order to be in that conversation, you have to do that on a year-to-year basis. And it's safe to say, I do agree, he has had an amazing start, as close to probably flawless as you can get. Only Tom Brady and Joe Burrow have beaten Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs so far. If it wasn't for those two times, anytime he has been in the playoffs, he probably could have made it to the Super Bowl each and every time, which is crazy to think about the what ifs. If he made it to those Super Bowls, of course, Tom stopped him from getting to a Super Bowl, and then Tom beat him in the Super Bowl. So you start thinking about all these what ifs. What if he beat Tom in that Super Bowl? What if he got past Tom again in the AFC Championship? How would that have turned out? How differently would people talk about him now? It's pretty fascinating to think about how already he could be. He's at, 3 right now? To have 3 more Super Bowls at his name just early on in this career would be just crazy to think about. Outstanding, extraordinary, all the adjectives you want to use. But this is how it has turned out. And not to say it's been bad, it's been anything but bad or anything like that. He has definitely been this generation's GOAT, if you want to put that label on him. This generation definitely is all trying to compete with Patrick right now. And now they're on the verge of completing even more history, adding another thing to his resume. I mentioned he just came off of his 2nd consecutive Super Bowl. Now he's on the verge of making history, of being the first team to ever accomplish a 3rd consecutive Super Bowl win with the Kansas City Chiefs. There has not been a team in the Super Bowl era, that's important to point out, that has ever done that. The Chiefs are the first team to consecutive Super Bowl wins since the New England Patriots in 2023 and 2024, about 20 years ago, now up to this date, roughly. So you look at that, you think of all the great teams that have gone through the NFL that we've seen, the different time periods of the Seahawks and how dominant they were, Peyton Manning's Broncos. Then the Chiefs started getting in there. The 49ers now always in the conversation. Recently, of course, the Patriots, and even the Patriots of how good they were. They got to this point, and then once you get to this point, no one has been able to overcome it. But technically, the last time an NFL team has seen a team in the league win 3 consecutive championships was all the way back in 1965 to 1967 with the Green Bay Packers. 2 of those titles actually came before the Super Bowl era, but they are championships, not Super Bowls, technically. So it hasn't really happened yet. The Chiefs have gone as far as any team has gone in history. Now it's just a matter of getting over that hump. And you look at the team now. Last year, the narrative was that Patrick had one of the worst, or not as good, I don't say worst, like they were bad. They certainly weren't bad, but one of the just less eye-catching offenses that he has had in the past. Of course, you have Travis Kelce, but at the receiver position, you don't have any household names like Tyreek Hill, who drew all the attention, got all the matchups, and was the number 1 option for Patrick. He didn't really have that last year, and even so, he still won the Super Bowl. So now you look at it this year, and they go out and sign Marquise Brown in free agency, formerly of the Arizona Cardinals. So you have that, and adding that to this offense already with their defense. I know they lost L'Jarius Sneed, but to me, keeping Chris Jones was even more essential. They were able to do that, and I still have confidence in their defense. And Patrick Mahomes, so far from what he's seen from Marquise Brown in the throwing sessions that they have, I mentioned spring practices have just started this week for them. Mahomes even said that he could almost unlock or tap into some untapped potential with Marquise Brown that has never really been seen from him before. And he elaborated on that by saying, I think he'll be even different than you've seen him before, because I think we can utilize him in different ways than I think he's been utilized before in recent years. He's excited to see the speed. Obviously, the route running pops out at you. Mostly the speed. He was mostly a deep threat, for a vertical threat for the Baltimore Ravens more recently when he was, coming up in the NFL, drawing a lot of attention to him. In Arizona, it was still impressive, but, the Cardinals are not in a good place, so he kind of lost some steam there. Now with the Chiefs, not only is it good for him, but I think the biggest thing, like Patrick alluded to there, over the middle of the field, speed, the route running is what really catches people's eyes. Using that in slot receiver scenarios, using that to complement Travis Kelce, who already owns the middle of the field, is that security blanket for Patrick. Adding another threat in the middle of the field in those slot positions, I think it's a different dynamic that they could have. Similar to Tyreek, because he could also work in the slot and work the middle of the field. And reigniting that with Marquise Brown and anybody else they bring in, I'm sure they're going to add more additions to this team. It's just going to be so much better, I think, from last year that this team, I'm just finding it hard to find any sort of issues that they could run into, any bumps in the road that they haven't already. Patrick's almost seen it all in his career, winning Super Bowls, winning MVPs and stuff like that, losing in AFC championship games. He's seen it all. So what more can teams or anybody else throw at him, barring there's no health or chemistry adjusting period that takes too long? I think those are really the only things that could stop this Chiefs team, because I'd be completely wrong if I bet against Patrick Mahomes for any reason. I think he's disproved all those doubts up to this point, and everyone, with what is going on with the Rashee Rice situation and potential suspension or punishment that could happen, be handed down to him, he's been practicing with the Chiefs so far already, so nothing's been really moving on there, but it makes Marquise Brown signing even more significant because he could potentially miss some time because of all that has happened in this offseason with him and the car accident. So we don't know where that stands. I won't talk about it too much because there's not too many facts on it, on any potential punishment that could have come back. So it's still all up in the air. But that makes it even more significant for Marquise Brown to come in, learn the offense, get into a rhythm earlier. It'll help out this offense even more. And then when they have everyone together, everyone's got to watch out, because this offense is a lot better just from a year ago. They still have the draft, still a lot of talent left in free agency. It could be scary, and I think this is as close as we're going to get to seeing a three-peat. I'm not going to call my shot on it yet because anything could happen in the NFL, but I don't have a good reason right now to think that the Chiefs can't get it done. Like I mentioned, I won't bet against Patrick Mahomes if it comes down to him being in the Super Bowl again. We're just going to have to wait and see how it all turns out. But to round it all off, greatly deserved as one of the most influential people in the world over the last year. He's done a lot outside of football, and to just grow the sport of football, definitely well overdue honor there for Patrick Mahomes. But in saying that, I will move on with another segment and with the show. A lot more topics to cover on today's episode. I mentioned Bill Belichick and Brock Purdy. Right after this break, we're going to come back and talk about Tua Tagovailoa and his contract extension possibility. Where do the Dolphins stand on it? Where does their GM think about when he's thinking of Tua Tagovailoa, in a good light, bad light? I'll explain more after this break. You're watching the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about now the second segment on our show today, Tua Tagovailoa and where he stands with the Dolphins on his contract extension. Last time we talked about it, it's been a while since we mentioned him and the contract and how it could all fall out into place, how much they could extend him for. Do they let him hit the free agent market now that 2025, after this season technically, he will be able to hit the free agent market. Of course, they could use the franchise tag, but if they don't, he could be a free agent. He is on the last year of his rookie contract in 2024. So the Dolphins picked up the fifth-year option in Tua's contract, fully guaranteed last year, probably around this point, for $23.2 million. And this could be the last year now with the Miami Dolphins, potentially, like I mentioned. With that possibility, now heading towards the draft and still in free agency technically, more people have started to guess, speculate, picking at 21 as they are. Could we see a move for a move up, a trade up to get a quarterback, maybe draft one in the later rounds if this Tua thing doesn't work out? It will come cheaper, but is that an option realistically for Chris Grier and the Miami Dolphins? Local media asked Chris Grier about it recently, about drafting a quarterback, and it was on Tuesday when he answered these questions. It's been a few days, but on that topic, he said, that's not something we're looking at in the first round. We're very happy with Tua. At some point, I wouldn't say we're not going to draft a quarterback. We drafted Skylar Thompson in the 7th round. So immediately, he has wiped those options off the table. That possibility of drafting Tua's replacement, essentially, if you draft a quarterback in the first round, you're not going to draft a number 2 quarterback in the first round, essentially. So Grier wiped away those possibilities, not really entertaining it from the tone, the way he answered the question. He went on to say that at pick 21, they can go on and draft an impact player, as he put it, and someone who could just help them basically right away, immediately, draft a starter on some other position on this roster. I talked about this sort of scenario before with them at 21, still needing a replacement for Christian Wilkins, trying to find some more offensive linemen, maybe 1 or 2 more. One starter, definitely, to replace Robert Hunt, who moved on to the Carolina Panthers, signed a big deal there. A very underrated guard in the NFL. He gets a big contract, well-deserved for him. But the Dolphins still need to fix up that offensive line a little bit with him gone. Christian Wilkins arguably was their most reliable, consistent player on defense. So at 21, I've thrown the name out there, Byron Murphy. I think he would be a perfect fit. But you have threats like the Los Angeles Rams picking at 19 that could also take a defensive tackle like Byron Murphy is, because the Rams lost Aaron Donald. He decided to retire suddenly to surprise everybody else. I'm sure it wasn't that much of a surprise internally. So the Rams, again, have had time to think about this. Do they target one in the first round? Even before pick 19 with the Rams or 18, I don't see the Jaguars, the Colts, or the Saints seeing that position at defensive tackle as a necessity. So it could be falling right into their lap if Byron Murphy starts to slide. I could see the Bengals or the Rams taking him. Definitely not the Steelers right before the Dolphins. So if the Dolphins just want to stay put and wait for that potential to happen, that could be somebody they could add at pick 21. But sticking with Tua and this whole thought about what do you do with this contract extension, where do the Dolphins stand on it? Well, some things to consider are that Tua is still only 25 years old. He is just coming off of making the Pro Bowl, leading the NFL with over 4,600 yards, 29 touchdowns thrown, and a 101.1 passer rating this past season. A lot of people tend to forget that early on in the season, Tua was in slightly some MVP conversations. A lot of people were considering him for the award just of how hot he came out from the start, how explosive his Miami Dolphins looked on offense specifically. He was certainly in those conversations, But then as the year went on, and the Dolphins hit some bumps in the road, we all know how it all ended there in the playoffs, losing to the Chiefs. It left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths, and that's fair because realistically, the start of the season doesn't matter as much compared to where you end, how well you perform in the playoffs. So that response is fair, but I wouldn't discredit it totally that at some point Tua was playing so well that people considered him for the MVP at one point with the numbers he was putting up. And on top of that, he stayed healthy for the whole year in 2023 last year, but there's also still that fear, those doubts about the concussions and his health because of 2022 when he suffered a couple of those concussions, had injury history, not just in the NFL, but also coming with him from Alabama. So that's something, again, that is a major concern. It should be. People bring it up a lot, but there is definitely some more positives now coming off of one of the best years he's had as a professional. It's something to consider now when you're talking about contracts and numbers and where does he fall in line with how much he makes per year compared to these other quarterbacks. Right now, the range of these top quarterbacks, starters in the NFL is starting to fall between the 45 per year minimum, 45 million per year minimum, to almost 60. That was what people have reported that Dak wants, 60 or maybe even more than that per year. Currently, the quarterback that makes the most on a per year basis is Joe Burrow at $55 million per year. It is important to point out that he was drafted number 1 in 2020, along with Tua Tagovailoa, who was drafted at number 5. So already there's that connection. Same draft class. He went number 1 overall, and now he's the highest paid quarterback per year in the NFL. You look at another quarterback that was drafted 1 pick after Tua, Justin Herbert. He's already signed an extension up to this point, earning $52.5 million per year. And those are already 2 quarterbacks that were drafted, 1 before and 1 right after Tua. And Tua still doesn't have a contract extension, while these guys are 2 of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. So that's something to consider. Everyone's always going to compare them, Tua and Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, just because of the draft class. It has panned out in 2020, because then if you look at 2021 and 2022, it is important for the Dolphins to keep in mind that if it looks too expensive, if Tua might seem like he's asking for too much and it might seem like you can't afford it, you have to just look back and see the class from 2021 and 2022 and think and realize that it's not as easy as it sounds as going and drafting a top quarterback and just thinking he's going to hit the ground running like a CJ Stroud, like a Joe Burrow, like a Justin Herbert. Not everybody does it. I think the only starters from those classes are Trevor Lawrence and Brock Purdy, who was picked last in one of those drafts. So 2 out of, I don't even know how many quarterbacks were probably drafted, probably like at least 10 or almost 10. A lot of them aren't even in the NFL and are definitely not starters. So it might not be always greener on the other side if you just really decide to move on from Tua. And like I mentioned before, Miami could still use the franchise tag on him technically in 2025. And then if they wanted to in 2026, if they really think he's their starting quarterback and that they can't lose him, they could franchise tag him for those 2 years after this year. But nobody really wants that for a player. If you really think he's your starting quarterback, you find a way to pay him. Yeah, of course you want to keep him, and that's a logical way to keep him. But I don't think you'd be doing right by Tua if you just franchise tagged him. If you really say you believe in him, you would pay him. But those are technically options for him. Something else that the Dolphins have to still keep in mind is that they recently just picked up the 5th-year options for Jalen Waddle and Jalen Phillips. Jalen Phillips, a pass rusher, outside linebacker, edge rusher, whatever you want to call him, has started growing into his role. This past year, he had, I think, 7 or 6.5 sacks in the first 8 weeks before he tore his Achilles, unfortunately. But he was growing into his own. He was showing great potential. Now he'll be playing on his 5th-year option, so his extension is coming up in the near future. And even more so, Jalen Waddle, great receiver, great pick for them in the draft in the first round when they took him. Drafted alongside Devontae Smith. So Devontae Smith just got an extension, $25 million per year, 3 years, $75 million in total. That's an example of what you could be coming for Jalen Waddle. Unless he goes absolutely crazy this next year, he should be getting probably around what Devontae Smith got, $27 million, I would assume. So those are two of your most important players coming up with extension, and then you still have Tua that I think you have to figure out first, in my mind, before you even get to these two other players. I don't have to mention again how important the quarterback is. Everybody knows that. But their general manager, Chris Greer, has stated for now, leading into the draft, we're only a week away, that their sole focus is on the draft right now, and then afterwards they'll start to worry, think about Tua's contract even more so, make it the main focus after the draft before they start really going deeper into it to avoid putting too much on their plate right now. That's what he said according to the Miami Herald. So that's where they stand on it right now. Not too much movement, and it really just comes down to determining how much the total is, the guarantees, how many guaranteed years does he have? Does he get it all up front in a massive deal like a Kirk Cousins did recently? If it's to that extent, if I were Chris Greer and the Dolphins, I probably wouldn't do that. As an option, you could franchise tag him once. I think that would be okay. Twice, I think that's just ridiculous. Doing it once to just see him prove it another year. Even this year could be looked at as a prove-it year for Tua, but really that's what the franchise tag year is there to do. They could do that and then tag him, but then you're cutting it close with the extensions to Jalen Waddle and Jalen Phillips. So that's a decision that they have to work out. Or, last resort, to just put a pin in this whole conversation, could be that you let him actually become a free agent. If you're really lost on what the value is for Tua, what could other teams think of him? Other teams could be thinking he's worth less, so you don't have to worry about losing him. Or other teams value him pretty highly, and if you let him hit free agency, some team could offer him a lot of money, and you could just lose your starting quarterback just like that by deciding to let him hit the free agent market because you couldn't put a price tag on him. Let him hit the market to see what his value is around the league, and you could end up losing him. So that's sort of a last result if you're really puzzled on what you're trying to offer Tua, if you really can't come to a conclusion. I don't expect it to get to that point just because, again, I have been a believer in Tua. I think he played great this last year. And people want to say he benefits too much off of Tyreek, Jalen, McDaniels, their coach, and just the whole system makes it easier for him, essentially. I think that has lost some merit to just fit a system. Not everybody can fit a system perfectly and execute it really well, like Tua, the timing, the connection he has with Tyreek and Jalen. You can't just stick anybody in there and have the same results. I think there is merit in fitting a system perfectly, executing it at a high level, like Tua has, that a lot of people, I just think, talk down on. I think he fits this team well. I think they're going to get better. I truly believe that they will get better with the additions that they've made through the draft, getting better. In a division right now also that's up in the air between them and the Jets, I think this could be a great year for the Miami Dolphins. If I haven't mentioned it before, they're my pick to win the division. Just from what I saw last year, they were in a bunch of close games that they just lost and threw away, mostly for me from inexperience. I think this could be a better year for them to grow and learn off of that. They have the pieces. It's just a matter of executing it with the pieces that you have, staying healthy. And if they have all that, I think this could be a great year for the Dolphins in the AFC. But we'll see how it all pans out. But in the meantime, we will move on with the show. 2 more topics coming up after the break. More recent is Brock Purdy, his comments on Brandon Ayuk, and responding to the contract extensions coming up for him and the recent Super Bowl loss, as well as going deeper into the situation with Bill Belichick and why he didn't get hired this season. So stick around. Those two stories are coming up in just a few seconds. We'll be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Keeping the show rolling with more segments. Before I jump into the third one, I want to remind you guys one last time on today's show, if you have any questions or comments you want to make throughout the show, use the tip and donations link that you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. Using that link makes it able for me to see your question in the chat box, read it on air, and carry the conversation that way, react to whatever you guys have to say. It's a massive help for this show, as well as all the other shows on the network, and we always show great appreciation to you guys anytime anyone is able to use that link with a question or comment. But going back to the segments, the show now on hand, Brock Purdy, we've talked a lot about John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, the organization, and how they've handled some free agent losses, the draft, and how do they stay relevant, stay at the top of the NFC with their players, with keeping this team together. A big part of that was Brock Purdy and how well he played this past year, being a game winner, a catalyst for this team in some tight games where he made game-winning plays and got them to the Super Bowl, large in part because of his play. And now he's come back out of his time off, of his off-season. Recently, over this past weekend, local media was at his youth football camp that he held at the 49ers home stadium, and they talked with him several topics, and one of them was the Super Bowl loss, how he has recovered in a sense from it, what he thinks about it now, has he had a chance to go over the game, to which he said, it still just stinks because there were plays out there that could have been made. I feel like there were a couple plays where I'm like, dude, that could have been the difference, but that's across the board. It's 4 quarters of every play matters. Mentioned how he's watched the game back already multiple times and has already caught those missed chances that he talked about in his answer. And he also talked about that that it did give him hope because they still have basically every starter coming back on offense at least, and he emphasized that learning process, that experience, that it is tough to swallow in the moment, but it is certainly able to be helpful for him. Still a young player, a young quarterback in this league. I'm sure it'll be a learning moment for him to grow out after that. And he transitioned into that desire now into the spring practices and getting back into the full as you can get swing of things with the team, with everybody getting back. And he said, I know guys like Christian, George, and Debo are all thinking like that. The fact that we've all played together for a year and a half now, that gives us a lot of confidence. Why wouldn't it? You just mentioned 3 of the best players at their position in this offense. They're stacked from top to bottom at offense, at defense as well, with Fred Warner leading them on that side of the ball. I still think they're at top of the NFC. Brock Purdy certainly thinks that they can get back there. It's just a matter of now solving some of the bigger topics with this team. When you have a team that's this good, that's in the prime, that's in their Super Bowl window that everyone likes to use, it's usually the topics off the field, the contracts, free agency, coaching hires, that usually get in the way are things that you have to handle now, and that's certainly one thing that was talked about, the contract extension of Brock Purdy. He showed his appreciation to the 49ers CEO, Jed York, for saying last month that quarterbacks should be paid a lot and that they're planning Brock Purdy's contract extension already for next year or his next contract whenever it does come, next offseason or the following. He said it was a good problem to have. To sum it up, he knows it's something you just have to get done. If you have a good quarterback, he accepts it, and he seemed willing to give Brock Purdy the contract that he deserves. And those were pretty flattering words at the time when I talked about it. He seemed pretty open, and not a lot of executives or people within the organization are so upbeat about it. They acknowledge that it's coming. They'll say something like, yeah, we know it's coming, or when we get to it, when it happens, it happens. Stuff like that. They keep it pretty stale. But he seemed very optimistic about it, and Brock Purdy showed his appreciation and also acknowledged that it is still a job and that I have to win games for this organization and I have to get better. Starting here at OTAs, everything will fall into place that it needs to, and that's how I'm looking at it. But I appreciate his kind words. Definitely appreciative of Jed York's comments on the contract talks, the money talks. Brock Purdy is still due to make $1.1 million on the salary in 2024. And right now, to compare him, to kind of project what kind of contract he could get, there are 12 quarterbacks making at least $12 million per year. So you'd expect him to fall in that group. We just finished talking about Tua and how the minimum seems to be, to me, 45. It could be 40, but I think, I mentioned 12 quarterbacks make at least $40 million per year. I don't think, just based off of last year, that there are 12 quarterbacks that anybody can name have a better chance at reaching a Super Bowl than Brock Purdy. There's definitely a handful of them, probably 7 or 8, that you would put in there pretty confidently. But then after that, I think you start really thinking hard of who you would even put in that conversation over Brock based on how he played, having a great year last year. And people will discredit him because they're stacked. They have a lot of great players. But like I mentioned in the playoffs, he made a lot of winning plays in some of the tough moments of the game against the Packers, against the Lions as well. He deserves some credit, and I'm sure, like Tua, I have confidence in him, and I'm sure he'll get a worthy contract of his talents, probably in that 47 to 50 range, if I were to guess, for the 49ers on how well he also plays this season, because I don't think an extension will be worked out this offseason. Next year, like their CEO, Jed York, said, they're anticipating that conversation being held, so we'll see how well he performs this year. If he makes another Super Bowl, expect him to be up there in the 50 ranges, I would probably guess, when those conversations are held. But the last thing Brock Purdy talked about and that the local media asked him about was this whole situation going on with Brandon Ayuk. If you haven't been following it, he is due for a contract extension, or he thinks he deserves one up till now. I'm sure a lot of people would agree with him. Coming off of the year he had, probably his best in the NFL. Since he was drafted, I think he has gotten better year in and year out. He has shown improvement in terms of just pass catching and being a wide receiver, just catching the ball. He has been very reliable. I say that just because Debo has been in and out. He lines up at running back. He's a very big component of this offense, but he, in all honesty, doesn't really catch 10 balls, 12 balls, 15, 8, 7. He's not really in that range. They use him all over the place, and in all honesty, they run the ball a lot, so he doesn't really get too many targets. I think they've targeted Brandon Ayuk a lot more. He seems to be getting a lot more receptions and a lot more receiving yards than Debo. So in that aspect, he has become a very reliable weapon for them, has a great connection with Brock Purdy, and the talks are still ongoing. It hasn't been going positive. I don't think anybody would say that. There's been a lot of social media actions. He's unfollowed the team. He's posted something on his Instagram story. If you ask John Lynch about it, he says the talks are going great, that they're ongoing, that they feel confident about it. But it's not the same energy, same feeling you get from Brandon Ayuk, and it's looking less than ideal for both parties. But Brock Purdy talked about it. He mentioned that he has talked with Brandon Ayuk on the situation, and all he said was, I just told him I'll always have his back and support him in whatever he does. I want the best for him. It's a business thing. So for me to say anything about that, that's out of my pay grade. He and I talk through things and I hear him out. He thanked Ayuk later in that statement as well for the opportunity to just help him grow, help him mature, and be such an important component in his own development and having so much success as well for his career. Ayuk was obviously a big part of that, so he made sure to thank him and show his appreciation with whatever decision Ayuk thinks, or decides, I should say. I think, like I mentioned before, this whole situation is just giving me those A.J. Brown, Tennessee Titan sort of feelings that we saw in 2022. I think the draft will probably be where the 49ers just come to a decision. This concludes itself with Brandon Ayuk getting dealt to some team. The Steelers have been probably the most consistent name being brought up, with Ayuk tweeting at Mike Tomlin and all that situation. It was funny, but I think outside of the Steelers, maybe the Jaguars because they lost Calvin Ridley. The Ravens are always going to be an option because everyone always says that Lamar needs a number one receiver, so how much would they be willing to trade there? Would be interesting to see. The Bills, they just lost Stephon Diggs, so why not? Would that be an option for them? Definitely contending teams. I'm sure Ayuk would want to go to a contending team if he was traded. That's out of his control, but ideally that's where he would want to go. Probably one of those teams, if not another one that I missed out on. But right now, I just get the feeling that they're just going to have to trade him. I don't think they can carry this on much further. Probably, if you want, into May, June. But then after that, I think it's getting to a point where I just don't think it's good because people are just going to constantly be asking about it, asking Ayuk about it. He's going to get tired of hearing it, and he might say something that he doesn't mean, and then he just gets all blown out of proportion. If they don't get it done, they've had all this time already to work it out. By the time the draft comes in just a week, I wouldn't be shocked if they traded him to somebody else to move up in the draft and try and replace him with a top wide receiver. Now, if you go that route, that would mean trading probably into the top 10. How much more would you have to give up for that? That's something they have to weigh out, but it is an option, and I do think he will be traded in the end. And then, if that happens, this whole situation with the Niners, maybe they have to target another wide receiver now. It all would lead into different millions of scenarios that we could talk about endlessly, but for now, he's still on the team. Brock Purdy, I'm sure, is staying hopeful that he stays around. He certainly thinks highly of him, but it is a business at the end of the day. Ayuk has earned a big contract just playing off of this year. He should get one. I think he'll get one. Now it's just a waiting game to see if it comes with the 49ers. But Brock Purdy seems to be excited to be back, hoping for a big year. We'll see how that pans out for him and the 49ers. But for us on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, we're going to go to the last break of the show. And on the other side, we're going to dive deep into the whole situation that has come to light recently with Bill Belichick, on rumors as to why he didn't get hired, what teams were interested, why they decided to turn away from him. All those details and my thoughts on it coming up after this break. You're listening or watching to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Thank you for joining me back now for this last segment of the show. It's been pretty crazy if you followed this whole scenario with Bill Belichick. Well, first thought that comes to mind with Bill Belichick, you think great head coach, historically one of the best ever. When it was announced that he wasn't going to be coaching the New England Patriots anymore, they decided to go in a different direction. You thought, how could this guy not get a job? How could anybody, not every team in the NFL, how could they not be knocking on his door to come coach them? Because of all the success that comes with Bill Belichick. And he was reportedly close to a lot of head coaching jobs this offseason. And it was close, like I just said, and nothing really came into fruition. There was a lot of maybes, close, imminent, those sort of words you hear, but it never came to solidify itself, and he was left without a job. The one guy you think would probably get hired first right away is still without a job right now. All the head coaching jobs are filled now, so unfortunately for Belichick, if he still wants to coach, that seems to be the census everyone's getting from Bill Belichick, that he still wants to coach. It would have to be until 2025. And now you get into sort of the reasons why, what happened, where, in which teams. Well, ESPN posted a big report article on their website that sort of went into very, very fine detail over this whole situation. But the biggest things that I took away from it, the first thing was that, according to ESPN and their sources, Bill Belichick finished outside the top 3 in a lot of these coaching vacancies that were out there. Finishing outside the top 3, not getting the job is one thing, but not even being a serious candidate outside the top 3 is pretty crazy when I read that. Specifically in Atlanta, which this all sort of revolves around, because that seemed like the closest Bill Belichick got to getting another head coaching opportunity. It was with the Atlanta Falcons. He had conversations with their owner, Arthur Blank, and it seemed to be going in the right direction. When I saw all the news, I thought like this was just going to happen. Compared to the Raiders, the Eagles, the Cowboys, or anything like that, the Chargers, a lot of smoke was coming from the Atlanta Falcons. I just thought he was going to fit there. He was going to take over that young, exciting team. But the report continued on by mentioning that Bill Belichick suggested that he only wanted to be the head coach there at Atlanta. There were some doubts, like there was all over the NFL, that Bill Belichick comes with this demeanor that it's his way or the highway. He wants to be in control of everything. He wants to be the general manager, have the final say, all these sort of things. The ESPN report said that he suggested to the Falcons that he'd only want to be the head coach, that he didn't need all that other stuff. He would just be fine with being the head coach. And after all that happened, there were still doubts from Atlanta executives that the people, the assistant coaches, his staff that he would bring on to any team that he was potentially hired with, that he could bring guys like Josh McDaniels, Matt Patricia, Joe Judge, his most trusted assistants. He's had success with all of them, but the doubts come up because Matt Patricia didn't do well with the Lions, didn't do well with the Eagles as an assistant most recently. So there's a lot of doubts there. Josh McDaniels didn't have the best of times in Las Vegas. So there's that. Joe Judge had a pretty awful time as the head coach of the New York Giants. So all these coaches that have branched out and have tried it on their own have been very unsuccessful on their own with whatever people think that they've learned from Bill Belichick, from learning under him this whole time. It hasn't really panned out for them. And Bill Belichick, the report claimed that he said that if you were to bring them on, that they were better soldiers than they were generals, were his words, according to this ESPN story that came out. That's why he thinks they failed. They were just not suited for being the head general, as he put it, the head coach in all these positions. He vouched for them that they were better under him, under his command, under his rule, if you would, that they were going to perform a lot better. But that didn't sit well with the Falcons, evidently, because when they announced Raheem Morris as their head coach, everyone, as well as Bill Belichick, was blindsided. And as the Falcons source said later on, after Raheem Morris was announced, that Bill Belichick was essentially voted off the island in terms of getting hired by the Falcons, seeing all the options on the table, nailing down a top three. Everyone just seemed to vote Bill Belichick as the one candidate that didn't fit, that they were unsure of, so he was voted off the presumed island that the Falcon source said to ESPN. And that's pretty surprising already in that statement, because I mentioned Bill Belichick and all the success, and whatever people want to say about him, it's pretty hard to ignore the success he has and how much he put into that organization, even if the rumors about his character and stuff like that, controlling personality, it is hard to ignore the winning, the success he's had. I know Tom Brady has been his quarterback, the greatest of all time, arguably, in people's minds, but I can't think it's all been around Tom Brady. A lot of his former players under Bill Belichick have vouched for him, have said he's a great coach, have talked him up a lot ever since he wasn't hired, but people still had their doubts. And there was also other job openings and other reasons why Bill Belichick didn't get hired in these other teams, according to the sources from ESPN. You start with the Philadelphia Eagles. They weren't really 100% from firing Nick Sirianni and taking on Bill Belichick. Their biggest fear was that same thing I've been talking about, that if they hire him, they'd have to almost surrender everything to Bill Belichick and do things his way, and then just blindly, in a way, just trust him, trust that it has worked in the past, and trust that he could continue winning. That didn't sit right with a lot of people in the Eagles organization, and they'd essentially have to start from scratch if he only stayed for a short period of time. And then what are they left with if they've surrendered everything, all the decision-making to Bill Belichick? They'd have to really start all over. They didn't want to do that. And you'd have to fire Nick Sirianni and all of that. They decided to just stick with Sirianni for at least this year. But their owner and Howie Roseman are reported fans of Bill Belichick. So they had conversations, according to this article, but nothing really came to be solidified. Then you move on to the Dallas Cowboys. You think Mike McCarthy, awful playoff loss. He has to be gone. But Jerry Jones really quickly decided to say that McCarthy is staying. He'll play out his contract. And that surprised a lot of people. And most people will say, if they know Jerry Jones or if they really have a good understanding of what Jerry Jones is like, they'll say that he's not the biggest fan of sudden change, especially to someone like Bill Belichick, because even though I don't think he's so controlling and so hard-headed that he can't be open to change, he still carries the the aura of being Bill Belichick, the powerful statement, the intimidation almost you get from seeing Bill Belichick being coached by him, walking into Dallas, those two personalities clashing with Jerry Jones. I think that put Jerry Jones off a little bit, not comfortable with that sort of change. Right away, he said, we're sticking with Mike McCarthy, that's it. He didn't really give an explanation too much. With a bad loss like that, I don't know how you couldn't move on, but he said that he was sticking with him, and that was the end of that. Then you have other teams like Las Vegas. Didn't make too much sense at the time. They just moved on from Josh McDaniels, so bringing in Bill Belichick, who McDaniels essentially learned under, didn't make sense for them. Antonio Pierce as well was very well liked, so that was crossed off. You look at the Chargers, Bill Belichick really didn't want to go to Los Angeles and coach in Los Angeles there in that situation, so that wasn't really taken seriously. With Washington, again, it gets heated and it gets pretty intense because their minority owner, Magic Johnson, suggested Bill Belichick as an option, but their majority owner, Josh Harris, wanted a stronger GM with the head coaching role to work under that GM, and I don't think anybody would think Bill Belichick would work under anybody. So that wasn't going to work out either way. Tennessee, again, they weren't open to the idea of Bill Belichick rebuilding something that they wanted to move in a different direction. They've modernized their offense, so Bill Belichick is definitely more old school, more like Matt Vrabel, who they just got rid of, so that, again, didn't really make sense for them. And the biggest thing about this, the most shocking thing to me was that trusted sources from ESPN have said that Bill Belichick believed that Robert Kraft actually called the Falcons owner, Arthur Blank, and warned him about not trusting Bill Belichick. Also, reports from Jeremy Fowler, Don Van Netta Jr., reporters from ESPN, have also said that the conversation Blank had with Robert Kraft, in their words, was the main reason why Bill didn't get the job. And again, if you read further into all these stories, there was also another thing that said that Robert Kraft called Josh Harris, the owner of the Washington Commanders, and basically said the same thing, not to trust Bill Belichick. But of course, the New England Patriots, their spokesperson, came out and rebutted that, have said that they would never talk down on Bill Belichick, that instead they advocated for him in a lot of these jobs. But it is hard to think that it is expected, that response from the Patriots, but it's hard to not believe the original report because, we're talking about ESPN. If ESPN's posting it, you'd have to think there has to be something there. And more came out about this, that one source said that if Robert Kraft might not have talked badly about Bill Belichick in these meetings, because I think that's the surest thing about this, that I don't think anyone's denying there was a conversation held, because if you're trying to hire someone, you go to the references and see what they think about it. That seems to be the surest thing. Now, what Robert Kraft said, that's just really hard to know unless you were part of that conversation. But most sources believe that even if Robert Kraft didn't talk badly about him, didn't say that he didn't trust him, he certainly didn't advocate for him, talk positively about him, didn't say, you have to hire Bill Belichick. Yeah, that's your best choice. You're making a mistake if you don't hire him. A lot of sources have said that it was just basically not good, not bad, but he definitely didn't advocate for him, which is the thing. To say he called and said, don't trust Bill, I think that might be a little bit too extreme, because that, with everything that they've gone through, the dynasty and everything that they had there in New England, I find it hard to believe that Robert Kraft might say something like that. It seems too extreme to believe, but that has been some reasons as to why he didn't get the job. People say that's what Bill believes. And then, just to wrap it up here closely towards the end, you look at what has come out recently, and I promise there is a connection here with the Dynasty series. If anybody saw it on Apple TV Plus, I talked about it, how a lot of players weren't happy about it because it didn't focus on the winning, and a lot of it had to do with scandals. And a lot of fans have said that it talked down on Bill Belichick as well. And ironically, it made Robert Kraft almost seem very good, painted him in a positive light as opposed to Bill Belichick. And what's all funny and interesting, and in a sort of conspiracy-like theory, if you look into the Dynasty, people who have watched it have said that the Dynasty, the whole thing was produced, it was copyrighted by Kraft Dynasty LLC. So Robert Kraft, his name is on the production, the copyright company that copyrighted this whole Dynasty series. And now people have started to look funny at this whole situation with the Dynasty and how it was painted out to make Robert Kraft look good. His production company has copyrighted the whole Dynasty. So people look at it as, how it doesn't correlate, it doesn't add up that this was copyrighted by his company, and it's hard to believe he didn't have a say in how this was all painted out to be. There's no allegations or accusing him of doing it. I doubt he was in charge of talk bad about Bill Belichick in this Dynasty series. But it is just funny how it works out and how his company copyrighted that production of that series. Then stories like this come out of him saying, don't trust Bill with these other head coaching job opportunities. And Bill now currently without a job. People want to ask why it hasn't happened. All these facts are out there. And it's just a little fishy right now in how all this falls into place. Of course, the Patriots and Robert Kraft aren't going to say that any of this is true, but it is fishy. There's something definitely weird about this whole situation, and ESPN wrote this big, detailed article about it. So if you want to learn more about it, I suggest go checking that out. But I just wanted to come on here and share the biggest points from it because it does paint and shed some light on why one of the greatest minds in NFL history, successful, accomplished coaches, doesn't have a job right now, is sitting on the sidelines, and that doesn't sit well. It's not really logical to think about, but it is a fact, and now Bill Belichick has more time on his hands than he has ever had, and I mentioned before, he has used his time wisely. He's going to be on the Pat McAfee show to cover the first round of the NFL draft, so make sure to tune into that and see that all happen. I'm sure it's going to be entertaining, but if you were wondering why this sort of situation worked out the way it did, how Bill Belichick didn't get a job, those are some of the reasons why, if you choose to believe them. That's up to you, but it is certainly convincing and pretty reliable coming from ESPN, so it is an interesting topic, a weird sort of fallout between Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick, but that's where it stands. Overall, I think Bill's going to get another job in the NFL. I find it hard to believe that this is the official end, but if some of this or most of this turns out to be true, I think that's very unfortunate for Robert Kraft or the Patriots to go to that length, but of course you can't say anything's for sure, but based off of everything that was reported and cited, it does seem to be still a little fishy and a little bit of a delicate situation at this moment. But that's where that stands. I'm sure more is going to come out on it in days to come. But for now, that's going to be it for that segment. And that's going to be it for this show. I wanted to make sure I got everything in there. So again, thank you guys for tuning into this episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following us on other social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more of the network's content. If you want to see more of this show and of me, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel on YouTube, where YouTube Shorts are posted every day. Full live recorded episodes are all on there as well, on top of individual segment videos. If you just want to watch a certain segment or missed one and want a recap of it, it's all on there on both channels. Make sure to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and football discussions with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys once again for joining me, and I will see you guys back here to wrap up the week tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn.